At the corner of the general's shrine lies a narrow, hidden path leading to the stonewashed strand. It appears ordinary at first, save for the eerie stone statues scattered across the shoal where Yanchi Ren resides. Born into a lineage of stonecrafters, Yanchi Ren is now known only as an old thief, driven mad by the death of his son. When he first sees you, he mistakes you for his son, Yan Junhao, regaining brief clarity only after you free him with a meridian touch, the very skill he uses to immobilize himself. At first, you believe that his ruin was the result of his own choice to abandon his family. Yet further details emerge only through repeated visits and deeper exploration. Yanchi Ren once dreamed of becoming a Jianghu hero himself. Under the brief guidance of Qinghe, head of the raging tide, he forged his signature art, the meridian touch. The technique soon carried his name across the Jianghu after he immobilized dozens in a single feat and stole a priceless jade guanyin statue. Yan Junhao, however, refused to learn the skill, ashamed that his father had become a celebrated thief. Whether out of disappointment or some unspoken wound, Yanchi Ren eventually left his family for a life of wandering. In the wider world, he fashioned himself into a Robin Hood-like figure, stealing from the powerful to aid the poor, though his ideals often faltered in practice. When he finally returned, perhaps drawn back by lingering attachment, perhaps worn down by the ruthless reality of the Jianghu, his wife deceived him into believing that their son was already dead, possibly as retribution for his departure. Yet if you speak with Granny Yan at Blissful Retreat, you will learn that she, too, has not seen their son for a very long time. From an old letter discovered near the ruins of the Northern Vow, you uncover the truth. Yan Junhao had entered the Jianghu some time before his father's return. He joined the Well of Heaven, and later, the Northern Vow. Alongside Lia Yan and other warriors, he chose to perish with his enemies in order to protect the civilians when Kitan forces reached Qinghe in 947. In his final words to his parents, he speaks of his love for his mother and of his regret at having misunderstood his father's spirit. But the letter never reached the hands for which it was written, leaving behind a mother who waited in vain and a father condemned to spend the rest of his life in regret and madness, both bound by a lie that tragically became reality. Passing through the stonewashed strand, you arrive at Heaven's Pier. The road is crowded with people gathering for the first jar banquet, all hoping to taste this year's freshly brewed parting tears. Aunt Han's banquet is always lively, you muse as you make your way along the path. Yet even so, the sheer tide of visitors and Jianghu wanderers assembled here takes you by surprise. As you cross the wooden plank bridges, you overhear travellers whispering among themselves. Some have journeyed all the way from Jiangnan, where the territories of the southern Tang stretches. The place stirs a faint recognition. You recall that the wayfarers' shared code, ends of the earth, inches apart, is likely drawn from a southern Tang lyric by Li Zhong. Behind the locked door and drooping veil, the moonlight tilts in cold and pale. So close the royal presence lies, yet distant as the farthest skies. Do these travellers share some hidden tie with the southern Tang court? Or are they merely wanderers bound together by heartbreak, borrowing a line of poetic lament? The period spanning the 5 dynasties to the early Song was a time of transition, during which northern and southern cultures gradually moved toward integration. In the early Song, the South had not yet come to be imagined as an absolute cultural centre. And yet, regions such as southern Tang and Wuyue did emerge as important cultural hubs, sustained by relative political stability. The Kaifeng storylines allude to this quiet shift, woven into the background of a world still learning how to hold itself together. As you turn to leave, a figure dressed in black on the far side of the river catches your eye. You hurry toward her, only to discover that it is Granny Tian from the neighbourhood, not one of the mysterious figures who left the dragon mark at Uncle Jiang's old hut. She tells you that a stranger had even mistaken her for one of their own, judging by her clothing alone. Sensing that something is amiss, you caution her against wearing that attire again. At Heaven's Pier, the first thing that draws your gaze is the white pear blossoms swaying gently in the breeze. In temperate regions like Qinghe, pear trees bloom from late March to April, quietly marking the season in which this story unfolds. In Chinese verse, the pear blossom often serves as an emblem of an austere and transient beauty, clear, cold, and destined to fade, gathering within it the sorrow of life's swiftness and the suddenness with which splendor gives way to absence. Aunt Han's name, Han Xiangxun, seems to echo this motif, its meaning hovering between seeking the cold fragrance and searching for fragrance amid chill. It was she who brought the pear blossom seeds here more than a decade ago from her hometown, and through the long years of war and the arrival of refugees, quietly shaped this place into a haven set against a chaotic world. From the imagery of the pear blossom also emerges the concept of the Li Yuan, literally, the pear garden. It was originally the name of a training ground for court musicians and dancers, founded during the reign of Emperor Xuanzong of Tang, and later came to serve as a poetic designation for the world of the stage itself. Li Yuan is also the Chinese name of the masked troupe, signalling that it was conceived as a sect modelled on an idol training order. In the lore, it was founded by Madame Gongsun, a famed blade-wielding dancer of the Kaiyuan era, 713 to 741 CE, whose name survives primarily through lyrics and anecdotal records of the art world. Through this lineage, the pear blossom becomes inseparable from art and from the memory of a golden age. After the waning of the Tang dynasty, that same image acquires a more elegiac weight. It comes to invoke the distance between former splendor and present desolation. As you approach the gates of Heaven's Pier, the townsfolk greet you warmly, addressing you as young master. You might wonder why you bear a title so often associated with villains in certain wuxia tales, but this is, in fact, a matter of localization. The archetypal villain young master usually corresponds to Xiaozhu or Xiaoye, terms that signify a blood-based closed system of private succession, a hierarchical logic at odds with the ideals of the Jianghu. Your title, by contrast, is Xiao Dongjia, which literally means young proprietor. It does not presuppose a rigid social hierarchy, as your authority is tied to tangible enterprises, inns, escort agencies, merchant firms, and thus carries an everyday quality. That is why, upon returning home, the very first thing you do is to return to work. Not far beyond the gate, you encounter Qiu Yuehai, another of the 8 heroes of Hedong who once defended Qinghe against the Kitan cavalry in 947. From this unrecognized local legend, you learn the technique known as the Heavenly Snatch and later the Lightness skills. In Uncle Jiang's annotated guidebook, such an encounter is described as a rare stroke of luck, though the entry is laced with his quiet mockery of Qiu Yuehai's habit of wandering off. It becomes clear that Uncle Jiang has managed to remain connected to his old comrades, despite being slandered as a traitor and a father-slayer. As you speak with the townsfolk and visiting guests, you begin to sense a quiet conspiracy stirring beneath the surface. Merchants mutter that the southern passage linking the pier to the outside has fallen under the control of some unknown force. Old patrons whisper that strangers from the south, along with an envoy from the southern Tang who claim to be seeking a Buddhist scroll, have been arriving in numbers far too great for a place like this. The south had been a major center of Buddhism since the Six Dynasties period, 229 to 589 CE, the era in which the story of Ba Wu is set in the game, and the southern Tang continued this tradition. Li Yu, the southern Tang sovereign at the time of the game, extensively sponsored the construction of Buddhist monasteries and promoted the ordination of monks and nuns. But what you learn next, quietly, unsettles this otherwise ordinary piece of historical news. When the shed for the first jar banquet was finally erected, those same guests with southern accents never appeared. A townswoman speaks of strange pigeons seen circling the skies, bearing secret letters sealed with a dragon mark sigil. The messages spoke of clandestine meetings at the blissful retreat, where hidden agents were meant to converge. Then your acquaintance Song Wu steps forward, recalling how a group of unfamiliar figures once swept through Heaven's Pier with brutal urgency, questioning everyone, probing the village entrances, sounding the river's currents, even cornering children for answers. No one was spared. Workers also complain about a recent influx of thieves. If you wander behind the vineyard, you will encounter a drunken visitor named Mu Bai and a scammer who, while tricking you into providing free wine, offers information that strangers from the southern Tang, under the guidance of an attractive woman, are pursuing a figure known as Killerblade, the notorious bandit whom Feng Jisheng has mentioned. Those unfriendly strangers at Heaven's Pier are likely the same men in black who breached the bamboo abode. Their sigil matches the mark left behind at Uncle Jiang's hut. More telling still, their arrival aligns too neatly with the recent influx linked to the southern Tang, whose true purpose is almost certainly neither wine nor banquet, a suspicion later confirmed when you explore the Palace of Annals. Your thoughts return to the letter you found at the outset, with its references to the dream puppet incidents in southern Tang, the very land into which Uncle Jiang vanished 3 years ago. The threads no longer feel scattered. The northern regimes to which Qinghe belongs in recent years, first the later Zhou and now Zhao Kuangyin's Song, have become a growing threat to the southern Tang. This pressure intensified in 958 when Chai Rong's campaigns forced southern Tang's territory south of the Yangtze, compelling its ruler, Li Jing, to assume the humbler title of King of Jiangnan and to pay annual tributes. This practice continued after the Song dynasty replaced the later Zhou in 960. Could all this be no more than a minor friction born of rivalry between states? You can only assume that it must involve Tian Ying, the dream puppet incidents, and Uncle Jiang. The northern vow, too, may be entangled in this web, given Uncle Jiang's lingering ties and the Orient Pavilion assassins slain by Sheng Wen and Sheng Wu. But what does any of this have to do with Aunt Han and her blissful retreat? You know only that something precious, likely a scroll, was taken from her several years ago by a man named Tian Ying, on a night when the bell in the adjacent Peace Bell Tower rang loudly without cease, and that she has been searching for it ever since. In the vineyard, your thoughts are interrupted by Uncle Joe's voice. The man who once led the townsfolk in planting pear trees across the pier at Aunt Han's behest, and who now serves as the butler of Blissful Retreat, is busy making arrangements for the upcoming banquet. You inform him that Ruby will be returning later with Beard Guang's caravan, and in turn, he delivers the bad news. Aunt Han is indeed furious about your decision to sneak out. On your way back, you may also encounter a girl named Xu Yimo, who is in fact the daughter of Xu Zhuge, the head of the Raging Tide, an old friend of General Wang Qing, and the one who earlier sent you the Stormbreaker spear scroll. She tells you that Killerblade's real name is Yi Dao, and that she herself ended up in Qinghe while following him. For reasons unknown, Yi Dao appears to have been in a great hurry, travelling from somewhere, perhaps not far from the Raging Tide's home base in the Heishi Corridor region, a core artery of the Silk Road, all the way here without rest. After learning some cooking skills from Xu Yimo, you quicken your pace, though not without catching a fleeting rumour of faceless figures lurking within Blissful Retreat. There is no time to pursue it further. Aunt Han is in a foul mood, and you are all but destined for a tongue-lashing, if not for the guests requiring your attention. You try to ask her about the big news that she's about to announce at the first jar banquet, but receive no reply. As you serve wine, you fall into the familiar rhythm of idle chatter with the guests. Some speak of the splendour of Weiyang City in the south, a fictional creation of the game, famed for its wealth and ruled by the Wen lineage, now under Wen Wuhen. At another table, the conversation drifts northward. The guests recall the late emperor's attempt to reclaim the lost lands of Yanyun 2 years ago, a campaign abruptly cut short by the commander's sudden death, Emperor Chai Rong himself, though they refrain from speaking his name. Their recollection, however, is slightly imprecise. Chai Rong's campaign took place in 959, not 960. After his death, the Kitans advanced south more than once in 960, only to be forced back by counter-offensives mounted by Song troops. Yet the guest's tone makes it clear that some place little faith in the current military commanders or in the so-called Jianghu heroes. None, in their eyes, possesses the strength to march against the Kitans at present. To them, the region of Yan'an, known in those days as Guanan, the southernmost reach of Yanyun, has already been bled dry by one failed northern expedition after another. They go on to spread tales of how the northern wilds along the Yanyun frontier have fallen not only to the Kitans, but also to marauders. Of all the names whispered over wine, one rises above the rest. Killerblade, a solitary wanderer said to have slipped into Qinghe not long ago. Years earlier, Killerblade had roamed with a petty gang of ruffians known as the 12 Calamities. His notoriety began on the night he was said to have slain Master Bai, who had sought to eradicate the 12 as part of the Northern Vow's undertakings, and to have hung the man's severed head upon the city wall, all without being seen. Yet Killerblade's fierce temper, and his iron adherence to his own word, soon set him at odds with the rest. When the 12 conspired to wipe him out, he answered with steel, felling each of them, save Zhong Wangchu, the man who had once gifted him the precious iron from which his blade was forged. Bound by an oath never to draw that weapon against its giver, Killerblade finished the final duel bare-handed, aided at a crucial moment by a disciple of the Well of Heaven, Chu Tsing-Tsuan, Aunt Han's lover. Given Chu Tsing-Tsuan's ties to the Northern Vow, it is hard to believe the tale of Master Bai's death is as straightforward as it is told. Why would Chu befriend the murderer of his own comrade? Were the 12 calamities themselves entangled with the Kitans? For now, such questions remain suspended in rumour. In a private chamber sits a woman in green named Qinghe. When the conversation turns to wine, she hints that the person she cares about the most is also the one she hates most, and that it may be impossible for her to taste parting tears next year. Before you can decipher her meaning, she begins to flirt, her words brushing close enough to leave you unsettled. Aunt Han appears at just the right moment, rescuing you from the awkwardness by sending you off to the porcelain kiln. But as you step outside, something stops you mid-stride. Qinghe's face bears an uncanny resemblance to Aunt Han. The realization tugs at your thoughts and draws you back. Compelled by curiosity, you linger outside the booth and listen. Although this encounter is presented as their first meeting, a document you find under the desk in the chamber notes that Qinghe nevertheless feels an inexplicable familiarity toward Aunt Han, as though bound by a predestined fate that draws her toward the very woman who is meant to be her target. It also notes that Qinghe is convinced Aunt Han is a prominent martial figure, one powerful enough to take her life, should the opportunity arise. Qinghe asks whether the inn's name, Blissful Retreat, Bu Xianxian in Chinese, literally unenvious of immortals, is derived from the phrase, "Neither Mandarin lovers nor immortals stir my envy." Aunt Han counters that it instead refers to a reunion in the mortal world leaves no envy for immortals. Both phrases are modern formulations that draw upon and recombine classical imagery. Qinghe's version is a hermetic reworking of a celebrated line by the early Tang poet Lu Jiaolin. If we were made but paired as twin-born eyes, what terror then hath death to make us quake? I would be wedded as the Mandarin fowl, and envy not the deathless ones above. Aunt Han's version, by contrast, reiterates well-established literary tropes rooted in Confucian and Taoist ideals, in which immortality is sometimes cast as inferior to human affective ties. Qinghe laughs, as though the mention of reunion were both absurd and strangely offensive. She ends with a teasing remark about Aunt Han's attractive face. You cannot help but wonder, is there some unresolved story between them? The porcelain kiln lies along a quiet mountain trail, seldom travelled. Midway through the climb, you cross paths with a band of men in black who have infiltrated Qinghe. Steel flashes, and when the dust settles, you search their fallen bodies and uncover a letter sealed for their superior. It lays bare 3 key facts. First, they have long suspected that Heaven's Pier was founded by Han Xiangshun. Second, Han Xiangshun is the prime suspect behind the attack that once left their leader wounded. Third, they believe Uncle Jiang to be entangled in an old incident because of his connection to Aunt Han. Taken together, these clues resolve into a clearer picture. Aunt Han has remained under the Orient Pavilion's scrutiny for a long time. The conflict between them is likely personal and deeply entrenched. Uncle Jiang, too, stands close to the centre of these buried secrets. For the moment, however, the advantage lies with you. The men in black have yet to confirm his identity or uncover the extent of his activities within their own stronghold in the southern Tang. From a player's perspective, this is unexpected. The prologue makes it clear that the Orient Pavilion already knew Uncle Jiang 16 years ago and had compelling reasons to pursue him. Yet here, they fail to recognise him at all, seeming to consider him only through his association with Aunt Han. One possibility is that he has successfully obscured himself by changing his name from Jiang Yan to Jiang Wulang, but this explanation is not especially persuasive. The character Yan shares a close semantic affinity with the phrase Wulang, making the name change an insufficient disguise, particularly given his continued proximity to the former headquarters of the Northern Vow. Another possibility is that the incident the Orient Pavilion now associates with him is not the same event that occurred 16 years ago. Could it instead refer to his journey to the southern Tang 3 years earlier, in 959? Either way, what emerges is a gap in knowledge. The current generation of Orient Pavilion assassins may be unaware of Zhang's ties to the Northern Vow, or Li Zuo, after 946, may have chosen not to pursue him with the same intensity. Upon arriving at the kiln, you are told by the worker, Song Ju, that someone broke in during his absence, smashing several porcelain and wine jars alike. You send him away to fetch replacements and begin examining the scene yourself. What you discover is far worse than expected. The horse thieves you encountered earlier at the general's shrine lie dead amid the wreckage, save for one, who still clings to life. As you move to help him, your path is suddenly blocked by a man wielding a massive blade. There is no time to hesitate, for you are hopelessly outmatched. You fall back on a technique Uncle Jiang once taught you. The man recognizes the move, and just as suddenly, he stays his hand. He is Killerblade, the infamous wanderer. Instead of striking, he issues a demand. You are to take him to Aunt Han so that he may claim something from her. You try to persuade him to spare the horse thief who is still alive, unaware that it is he, alongside his now dead companion, who had collaborated with the Orient Pavilion in their pursuit of Killerblade. Subsequently, you take his decision to slay the last villain who chased him into the porcelain kiln as proof of ruthlessness and assume that he is no ally of Aunt Han, only to realize soon after that he is not a man easily deceived. With your hands bound behind your back and forced onto his horse, you devise a plan to lead him astray into the Witherwilds and seize an opportunity to escape at the Ghost Temple, a place the townsfolk dare not approach. Rumors claim the temple is haunted. You dismiss such superstitions without fear, especially since you learned long ago of the secret passage hidden beneath its crumbling walls. Your plan works smoothly. The hidden passage does not carry you far from where you were held captive, but it leads you far enough from both Killerblade and the mists of the Witherwilds. From here, you could return to Blissful Retreat without much delay by following the main road. Yet something else draws your attention. The bleak silhouette of a nearby settlement known as Wraith Village. The place appears almost abandoned, save for a few figures, one man devouring a chicken alive, another honing a blade, and a third, Barshan, stirring something suspicious in a massive pot. When you ask what is happening, their only response is that you should not be here, linger any longer, and you too may fall prey to a mysterious disease. Searching the village, you uncover scattered notes and other unsettling traces of what transpired here. The villagers are afflicted by a strange illness that drives its victims into madness, gradually stiffening their bodies as though turning them to stone before finally claiming their lives. For a time, the disease was held in check by a figure known as the Deer Goddess, a benevolent presence who wandered the region offering aid. She was, in fact, Liu Qinghe in disguise, yet she died in 936 CE, long before the sickness returned to claim the village anew. The villagers exhausted every remaining hope for salvation. Outsiders attempted to help, among them a man named Tianying, who sent a scroll referred to as the study of yin and yang, in the hope that it might prove useful, but none succeeded, for none knew the truth behind Sun Buzi's experiments. As madness and desperation hardened into paranoia and superstition, the villagers began killing one another, and human flesh was brewed into medicine. It was also here that the story between Tianying and the lunar goddess Li Zhenzhen first began, one whose consequences continue to ripple outward. As you continue your search, you notice that Barshan has slipped away into another room. There, he stands before a coffin, murmuring that he is already preparing to follow his dead kin down the final road. Only then do you realize that he is the head of the village, the father of the mad groom for whom Li Zhenzhen was purchased in a marriage that was meant to invite auspiciousness, yet yield only ruin. Tracing his path, you are led to the village graveyard, where two men mutter the same refrain, that it is time for them to be on their way. Their words are thinly veiled confessions of a desire for death. But before you can intervene, darkness overtakes you. You awaken in a room within the village, as though struck unconscious. Outside, the village is already ablaze. When you find Barshan once more, he attacks without hesitation, his reason shattered. You defeat him and demand to know why he would choose to burn those who still live. He answers only that it is something an outsider could never understand. It turns out that the remaining villagers have decided to end their tragedy once and for all. The flames leave no room for further questions. You are forced to flee. This is the end of the story of the Wraith Village, or rather, of Little Deer Village, as it was once known, before Sunbuki's poison hardened into the curse that now haunts every soul left behind. But if Sunbutsi alone bore the blame for Wraith Village's ruin, how could the sickness have crept back roughly during the decade leading up to 952 after his departure, sometime between 923 and 936? The answer begins to take shape only after your descent into the gleaming abyss, where half-buried records and phantoms from the past bind the stories of Ba Wu, Sunbutsi, Li Zuo, and Liu Qinghe to the village's fate. As the head of the Aureate Pavilion and the one who carried experiments in poison and immortality forward, it becomes difficult to dismiss the possibility that Li Zuo, like Sunbutsi before him, may have turned Wraith Village into a proving ground, offering its people up as vessels, and in doing so, reawakening the so-called curse. The signs linger still. Operatives of the Aureate Pavilion can be found at the outskirts of the region. Even the crows that stalk the village, trained to harry and drive away any traveller who strays too near, begin to resemble sentinels deliberately set in place. After defeating the Void King, who has retreated into the depths of the gleaming abyss, guarding Liu Qinghe's tomb and vowing never to emerge again until he has slain 1,000 people in atonement for his defeat by Jiang Yan 16 years earlier, you finally return to the blissful retreat, only to find that Aunt Han is nowhere to be seen. When you ask your friend Du Du Do about her whereabouts, he offers an absurd theory, that Aunt Han and his master, a doctor named Unfated Tian, and also a close friend of hers, might in fact be ghosts. They have a habit, he says, of vanishing for long stretches of time, only to reappear suddenly from places where no hiding spot exists. You have little patience for superstition, but the mention of their frequent disappearances gives you pause. Deciding to do him a favour, and to satisfy your own unease, you make your way to the locked second floor of Unfated Tian's clinic, adjacent to the blissful retreat, with the help of Yao Yao Yao, another of Tian's disciples. You may wonder why these names appear to repeat the same characters. In fact, Dao's and Yao's given names are written with characters distinct from those in their surnames, and Yao Yao, which constitutes Yao's given name, is pronounced differently from her surname. That said, this does not mean their master lacked deliberate playfulness or affectionate intent in naming them. Historically speaking, giving children names composed of 2 repeated characters was a common practice during the Song dynasty, and some people still do it now. Such names were typically used as childhood nicknames and would later be replaced with more formally appropriate names, particularly in literati families back then. The name Unfated Tian corresponds to Tian Bu Shou, which literally means not retrieved into the realm of the gods. The implication is that he, or those under his care, would not be easily claimed by death, a fitting name for a doctor. His surname should not be confused with that of Tian Ying. Although romanized the same, the characters and pronunciations differ. His clinic, Evercare, appropriately means the clinic of the living in Chinese. On the second floor of the clinic, you discover a set of blades, too precise for combat, fashioned instead for surgery, and a record revealing Dr. Tian's enterprise to be unimaginably lucrative. Following the traces left behind, you descend through the clinic's well and enter a multi-storied underground hall, a labyrinth of tunnels, interlinked chambers, and hidden traps. This place is known as the Still Shore. Shapes loom in the darkness. Faceless figures linger at the edges of your vision. The rumour you heard from a visitor to Blissful Retreat proves true. From their fragmented speech and the objects scattered around them, you gather that they once belonged to different sects of the Jianghu. They seem to recognise you from many years ago, an implication that they have lingered here for a long time. Their minds are disordered, though they bear no true hostility. Some will strike if you move too abruptly, driven by confusion rather than intent. A note affixed to the wall beneath the entrance suggests that Aunt Han may once have been allied with the villains. Only later do you realise that it is, in fact, a coded set of instructions outlining how to evade the traps woven throughout the tunnels. Yet, when you enter a brightly lit chamber lined with masks, each one shaped with such precision that it resembles a human face carved away from living flesh, the insinuation of that earlier alliance begins to feel uncannily plausible. There, you uncover a journal recording the profits earned from performing face-changing surgeries for the wealthy. The handwriting belongs to a renowned figure in the Jianghu known as the Water Lady, and it matches, unmistakably, that of Aunt Han. Someone is singing at the far end of the corridor. In what appears to be the main hall, an old music score and a jade flute rest quietly before a faceless figure still lost in his song. You lift the flute and attempt the melody inscribed upon the page. The Song of Longing, known in Chinese as Sifang Ge, the Song of Sifang. Si means to think, to remember, to yearn. Fang, meanwhile, originally referred to the fragrance of grasses and plants. Yet, as early as the classic of poetry, a collection of poems dating from roughly the 11th to the 6th centuries BCE, the image of fragrant grass already gestures towards something pure, ideal, and deeply desired. By the 3rd century BCE, the poet Xu Yuan, in Li Sao, repeatedly likens his own fate to that of fragrant plants, extending Fang beyond scent to signify moral integrity, talent, and worth left unrecognized. Such metaphors carried their resonance into the Song dynasty. Over time, the grassy image evoked by Fang also acquired more melancholic overtones, frequently appearing as an emblem of parting and homesickness. The poet-emperor Li Yu, for instance, known in the game as the Shimmer of the South, writes after the fall of the southern Tang, "Parting's grief, like tender grass of spring, doth lengthen still the farther I depart, and ever grows where'er my footsteps fall." Heard in this light, the Song of Sifang becomes more than a simple expression of longing. It is a lament for something irretrievably lost, an ache that lengthens with distance and time. In the world of the game, that loss finds its name in the ceded lands of Yanyun. The singing faceless man is named Chengxin. He cradles a chest in his arms, containing ordinary objects once owned by the other faceless figures before they entered the still shore. He asks whether the ceded lands of Yanyun have been recovered. The answer is no. Chengxin offers no complaint. He replies simply that the day will come, eventually. Noting that the faceless figures are drawn to the melody, you play it again, luring them closer and enlisting their help to open the gate to the treasure room. There, you discover that Aunt Han and Dr. Tian have been funding Blissful Retreat with the proceeds from their unique face-changing surgeries. Before turning to the scroll on the desk, you uncover another crucial record, one that sheds light on the saying that Aunt Han lost something important several years ago. 3 years earlier, in 959, a woman from the revelry hall named Lin Jiangxian, literally the goddess by the river, signed a face-changing contract with the Water Lady. She is the same person as the Lady Ugly, now living in the Flower Expanse, likely a former disciple of the Velvet Shades. Her face was deliberately disfigured by members of the Wen lineage of Weiyang City, who envied her beauty after she married into the household, the very reason she sought to face-changing. Her surgery, however, was postponed after an important scroll and several medical instruments were stolen and replaced with counterfeits, an act carried out by Tian Ying. The contract also reveals that such surgeries are not always successful, an explanation for the fate of the faceless figures. The secret Jianghu record found on the desk in the treasure chamber is a compilation of basic intelligence on major sects and martial art styles, gathered by a Kitan spy identified as a superior general of the Flying Dragon Guard. The title, Flying Dragon Guard, Fei Longwei, originates from the military systems of the central Chinese dynasties, where it typically referred to elite units charged with palace security or the personal protection of the emperor. In the Liao dynasty, the state established by the Kitans, similar functions were most likely carried out by the Central Imperial Guard or by the emperor's personal troops. But extant records do not attest to the existence of any unit bearing the specific designation Flying Dragon Guard. Instead, the Liao military system revolved around formations such as the Ordo, the Palace Guard Corps, and the Pishi Army, an elite core force likely founded circa the early 10th century by Yelyu Abaoji, the founding emperor of the Kitan state. The scroll is riddled with gleeful absurdities, martial arts names misspelled with reckless confidence, and a catalogue of sect gossip masquerading as intelligence. It notes, for instance, the Well of Heaven disciples' alarming tendency to lapse into suspiciously intense brotherhoods, records, without mercy, that Shijiuge, head of the Raging Tide, lives in fear of his wife, Jianghu, and reveals that the Lone Cloud circulates a gossip newsletter listing the 10 qualities required to become the most sought-after young wanderer in the Jianghu. In the section on the nameless swords and nameless spear, Uncle Jiang is described as carrying a child, proof that this document could not have been composed later than 959 CE. Its intended recipient was the Kitan Emperor himself, either Yelu Ruan, reigned 947 to 951, or Yelu Jing, reigned 951 to 969. The intelligence, however, was intercepted en route by Jianghu heroes in Qinghe. Scrawled in the margins are annotations and mockeries, including a remark deploying the phrase radiant and sanctified as a lifelong taunt aimed at Jiang Wulang. Judging by the tone, these notes were almost certainly added by unfated Tian. Thrilled by the records of martial arts you have never encountered before, you begin to practice the techniques described in the scroll. Yet the instructions are inaccurate, and this soon plunges you into a state of physical and psychological collapse, one that, in common wuxia law, may drive a practitioner into the grasp of dark forces. That fate, however, does not claim you. You awaken in a foreboding room that resembles unfated Tian's clinic. When you open the door, a cave-like corridor stretches before you, phantoms looming in the half-light. As you move among them, you begin to understand what they are, incarnations of the memories of the faceless figures bound to the still shore. They were once Jianghu wanderers who willingly surrendered their faces and identities so that they might travel north into the Yanyun region, gathering intelligence on the Kitans in the hope that their sacrifices would aid the central Chinese regime in reclaiming the lost territories. But their face-changing surgeries failed. Reduced to faceless beings, they were condemned to remain within the still shore, not as punishment, but out of necessity. By erasing themselves, they protected the missions of their comrades, who, like them, had abandoned their former lives for a cause that promised no return. The terminus of this dreamscape is an apocalyptic space wholly unlike reality. There, you encounter an enemy identified only as Heartseeker. Her attire mirrors that of Tianya, yet her face resembles Aunt Han's. The game's description of this boss encounter unfolds in lyric form, alluding to the 16th century novel Journey to the West, the text on which black myth Wukong is based. Specifically, it reworks the inscription carved at the cave dwelling of Wukong's master and mentor, Puti Zushi. The Mount Lingtai of the square inch, the cave of the slanted moon, and 3 stars. This phrase functions both as a named location and as a word puzzle that ultimately points toward the character Shin, the heart-mind itself. Returning to our story, the first 2 lines describing Heartseeker read, "From the cave of the slanted moon, song drifts faint and far. It sends me the blade of the square inch, cutting dreams apart." These lines suggest that Heartseeker is an inner demon seen in hallucination, an incarnation of psychological burdens, morbid obsessions, or distorted beliefs that must be confronted and overcome, a common thing within the wuxia tradition. The name Heartseeker itself implies that what one has lost is not benevolence, but a complete understanding of the self. Could this enemy, then, be the personified form of what Aunt Han has long hidden from you? Might it represent a past she refuses to memorialize, yet is ultimately unable to escape? And are these hidden things bound to the deeds of the Northern Vow and the Hanging Blade, or to the conspiracies of the Aureate Pavilion? More troubling still is the question of perspective. Why is it not Aunt Han herself who confronts this nightmare, but you, a seemingly unrelated teenager? And how is it possible that Aunt Han and Qinghe are said to have met for the first time when the figure of Heartseeker suggests that their histories are already deeply entangled? Anyway, your life is implicitly altered from this moment onward, as suggested by the final 2 lines describing your fight with Heartseeker. In reverence, innocence claims this ground where souls find rest, and thus are seized the thunder's roar and the crimson tide. The innocence invoked here likely refers to you, while the ground where souls find rest points to the still shore, a place that is at once a prison and a refuge for patriotic spirits. The thunder and the crimson tide may signify not only Heartseeker's attacking skills, but also function as metaphors for the thrill of revelation and an onrushing surge of passion and violence. Taken together, these images seem to foreshadow what is yet to come. The calamity destined to befall blissful retreat, or your own passage into the wondrous yet ruthless Jianghu, a world in which your innocence first brushes against the full brutality of life beyond its gates. After defeating the Heartseeker, you are roused by Qinghe, the leader of the Faceless. He confirms what you have suspected. Aunt Han is indeed the famed water lady. He also tells you that the jade flute was a gift from a close friend, one who, like him, underwent face-changing surgery in preparation for a life as a spy. His friend's surgery succeeded, Qinghe's did not. That failure marked, in all likelihood, their final meeting. If you consult the homepage of the Hanging Blade, you will find that in 949 CE, it launched an operation known as Hidden Swallow. The Northern Vow, too, participated in the operation from 959 onward. This was the very undertaking for which the Faceless figures had prepared and yet never truly took part. 13 years spent in darkness have all but exhausted their spirits and their minds. Qinghe admits that he has refused to relinquish his faith, sustained only by a promise his friend once made, that they would be reunited someday. You bid Qinghe farewell and depart through the door behind him. As you leave, your thoughts return to the name of Aunt Han's Inn, Blissful Retreat, a name steeped in the quiet hope of reunion. And in that moment, you feel that somehow, without ever setting foot beyond its bounds, you have already entered the Jianghu.
分起留妖气，似风切，春入房里，雨烦躁心，路绵延啼哟。江中火，水中溪。